I think I'm not intentionally, but I've been angling for a Waterloo sponsorship. Like every time.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
like,
I noticed that. You
so many people have pointed
Right,
that. I'm like, well,
right.
hey, if Waterloo approaches me
Right,
about a sponsorship,
right. They
I'll
should be
let
like,
them. I'll
hey,
let them.
hey,
All right. Well, so Vince, let's go and get started, man. Vince Lewis, nice to have you on the podcast. Appreciate you coming on.
Spencer, it's a pleasure, man. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks.
Honor, actually.
An honor. I don't know if that's
I've
true.
been admiring you from afar. So with all the content you've been
Yeah.
doing online, man, it's been cool. So been a big plus for our
Well,
industry.
likewise, kudos. You guys have put together a podcast as well as you've got your little, like, I don't know what you call that, the video where it's a couple minutes of a topic.
Information.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's super cool. And I appreciate that. I even remember you guys a year or two ago put together a commercial, I believe, in the office, and it was a
Yeah,
partner. And
right.
it was really, really well done. And I'm
Right.
like, man, I wish more people would take advantage of this medium because I think it just establishes you really, really quickly. It looks professional. It builds your brand. And you guys have run with that. So I appreciate you doing that too, man.
No.
And thank you for coming. I know you, so we'll talk about this. We both just came back from SIA in Austin, the Self-Insurance Institute of America's annual conference. So tell me about your experience, man. Did you enjoy it?
Well, it was interesting to say the least. You know, I've been going to these for as long as I can remember, right? And so this obviously had a different flavor because of the pandemic and the way they had things structured. But what I felt was like there was more quality of meetings versus quantity of meetings. You know, I thought everything everything that at least that we were able to do was very fruitful in terms of the impact of the people you were talking to. You know, I think the way things were set up with the speakers and stuff was a shock to a lot of people.
It was
in terms of having folks, you know, not there live to talk, and you know, having seeing outside the exhibit
be able
hall.
to raise your hand,
right?
and
Ask questions and things like that. That was interesting, but you know, all in all, it's SIA, man. It's a way to connect, man. It was so good just to see everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a ball just catching up with folks I hadn't seen like at least in a couple years, at least in, you know, person to person, and it was just good to connect with everybody, catch up with everyone. I think a lot can be said for human connection and the ability to. I mean, as we always say, it's a relationship business, right? And I think now, at least being able to get back out and talk to people kind of just makes that even better going aside.
Oh, I can't echo that sentiment stronger, man. Just so good. I mean, it really, honestly, the last conference that I went to was SIA 2 years ago in San Francisco, right? So, like, there was just that element of I love SIA in general. Obviously, it's in both of our wheelhouses for what we do in our career.
Right.
So all the people you're going to see there obviously understand this business and we work together. But it was the fact that, there was people that I have known for a year and a half virtually on LinkedIn and things like that, and then finally put a face, an actual face to a name.
Yeah, exactly. Meet them for the first time.
Yeah. You yourself included.
Yeah,
we actually
exactly.
Met for the
We
first
met
time.
exactly.
Yeah.
Just meeting people for the first time, and then meeting people who I've known and worked with for the last 15, 20, 25 years, and just being able to see them and say, hey, how you doing, and give them a hug, and hey, are you doing okay?
Yeah.
And because you wonder about some people, and you're like, hey, how did they get through COVID okay? Did they have any issues, or is their family good? And just to be able to connect on that human level, man,
Well, I mean, I'm really honest. I cannot agree more. And I think I actually had a call with our co-founder. He's our COO this morning to catch up because we probably hadn't spoken in a week since I've been traveling and things. And I was like, man, the thing that I really came back with is one, good meetings and good connections, good opportunity and things like that. It was just I was reinvigorated just seeing people again and just going, there's some drinking, there's some socializing,
right, a little hanging
fun
out,
stuff,
just
a little hanging
just
out.
A little.
But I think it was just like, I just recharged my batteries, even though I'm tired. I actually recharged my batteries in terms of that relationship side of the business that's been taken away for so long. So Self-Insured Institute of America, SIA, or do you say SIA or SIA?
I say SIA.
Okay,
absolutely.
most people say SIA. I believe it's SIA. Check them out if you're in our industry for sure. Not meaning to do a plug, but I'm a big fan of what they do, advocate for our industry, and the conferences are top notch. So minor criticisms aside, really, really, really a successful experience. So let's get into it a little bit.
Let's do it.
Obviously, we're going to talk about stop loss. Partners MGU is a stop loss MGU, and I'll give you a chance again to spend a couple minutes defining that. We've done it once before, but we'll define it again. But before we do that, I want to know you, Vince. So let's talk about your back history, your work history, your life, your family, those things. Let's just lay it out there.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Let's talk work first, or at least professional history.
Sure.
Well, no, let's go personal.
Let's
stuff
do personal.
First.
Let's
do
get to know
personal
you, man.
stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm originally from Detroit, raised in the Detroit area. Went to Michigan State, go Green. And so after after college, my father was a tailor.
Oh, really?
And so when
this is making sense.
Yeah. My dad was a tailor. I've been in the menswear game, at least watching my father, go through that. And he owned his own store, and then he worked for various stores, and I kind of would tag along with him, and eventually worked my way into the sales floor and do selling clothes and stuff like that. And I'm like, hey man, this is my destiny, right? And so I continued to try and tried to work toward that end. And when I got out of school, my degree was in marketing, and I said, natural stop for me is to start trying to see if I can work for a department store and be a buyer for menswear or whatever. And got that opportunity, and through a series of events, all of which I'm not going to say it's all, who I was involved with, but on my part, it just didn't work out. Okay. I just didn't find it was just the right groove for me. And so, I have this saying, I always start off our own podcast by saying, we didn't find insurance kind of found us.
Yeah.
And so I, started kind of looking at like, hey, what else could I be doing? And so I got a call one day from a recruiter who said to me, hey, I've got this opportunity for you with an insurance company in their training program, and one of the top insurance companies in the United States, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, hey man, this is awesome. I'm sitting in my apartment near downtown Chicago looking out at the city, and it's like, man, this is awesome, man. Where are we going to be, in the suburbs, man? We downtown? Who is it? Who is it? And you guys was like, hey, it's in Des Moines, Iowa. And I was like, what?
Des
Moines, Iowa. Yeah. Great city. No hate. No hate. All love, right? All love. But yeah, so we got, I ended up interviewing, and what was then known as Bankers Life Insurance Company, which is now known as the Principal Financial Group. Okay. And they offered me a couple positions. One was in claims, and the other was in underwriting. And I just said, let's try underwriting. I said, I like math. It sounds like interesting, so let's go that route. And so that's kind of how I got started. So I started underwriting, and then underwrote for probably the first 10, 15 years of my career, probably first 15 years of my career, and then kind of matriculated over into the sales side.
So you started as an underwriter before getting into sales, which I actually, a couple of people I know have done that. Makes total sense when you're talking about something technical like stop loss too. If you can, you understand the numbers, you understand the mechanisms behind it. Well, it's very easy to talk about the provisions and the numbers when it comes to presenting the quote. So did you like underwriting? Did you latch onto it pretty quickly though? I mean, once you got in it, was that interesting to you or what?
The learning curve was probably for me about 3 years.
What type of products, by the way, were you underwriting?
Pretty much everything.
Okay.
At that time, it was everything from life insurance all the way to to life and medical, life disability, medical. Did some ASO business, self-funded business, but primarily fully insured and life and disability products. So we just didn't learn how to underwrite one product. We learned how to underwrite all of them.
Okay.
And so at least it gives you some better perspective on things. And then, like I said, it took me like 3 years to actually feel like I was comfortable enough to know what I was doing and be able to make good decisions. The way initially in my career when it was set up, my first job, you had a team that kind of did all the work up, and then you kind of made your adjustments, and then you presented it to your manager, and then they, signed off on it or didn't, so I learned a lot by my mistakes, and then kind of cleaned those up, and then, like I said, got into a groove where I felt like I knew what I was doing.
Well, cool. And so that you said you spent about 10 years underwriting before
about 15
before even getting into sales. So what was the transition there? Was it like, man, I just want to do something different, or I feel like, obviously you talked about some of your interests early on. Maybe a department store, your father was a tailor. Of course, there's a lot of a social aspect to that.
Sure.
Was that some of the lead into wanting to get out in front instead of staying behind the scenes underwriting?
Well, I've always liked to solve problems. I've always, good or bad, I'm kind of a people pleaser. So I like to solve problems. I like to help people, and I'm consultative. I like to believe I'm consultative in my approach. So if you're selling clothes or you're selling insurance, you have to give advice. You have to, put the customer in a position to feel like you're the person who's selling is a subject matter expert.
Yes. And
so if you can put yourself in that position, they're more inclined to, rely on you and believe in what you're saying and like, okay, I like that. So, and then, people were saying, no hate on underwriters again. I was once one, but like, hey, you got a personality, so you could probably actually might have you might have a opportunity in sales, so you should really check it out. And so I kept, at the time I was working for a smaller MGU at the time, and I kept pushing my boss to see if I could get into the sales side, and eventually he allowed me the opportunity to do that. And
so you were actually pushing for it. You proactively wanted to do it.
Yeah. I wanted to do it. Yeah, it wasn't no one like, hey, people suggested, customers and stuff suggested it that I consider it, but then as I started to think about it more and more, I was like, yeah, this is something I really want to do.
And was that with Principal, or was Zurich in your background?
No, Zurich, that's way down the road, Spencer.
Sorry,
I've been doing this a long time, bro.
I try to piece it together on LinkedIn. And some people go, they don't go so far back. So this was still with Principal at the time.
No, this was actually after. This was 2 jobs later. Okay. So I underwrote. Yeah, I was at Principal. Then I moved to Chicago, worked for a company called American National Insurance Company. Did that for a few years, and then I got into the stop loss world. Okay. And worked for a company, a small MGU in the Detroit area. Worked with them for a couple of years, and then what ended up happening was some of the people in that organization left and started a new MGU. I came along with them, and underwrote for a time, and then kind of got into the sales side at that point.
Okay. Yeah. Was there a point in time where you said, hey, I really do want to focus on stop loss, or did it just happen to be that way?
It just happened. Okay. Right? Like the recruiter called me, said, hey, they're looking for an underwriter, and I knew what self-funding was. Mm-hmm. Back then, again, I'm dating myself, right?
That's okay.
But
that's right.
No, it's cool. But underwriting stop loss used to be as simple as go into a big manual, you open the book, you look how many, you kind of interpolate the number, the size of the group, and what the spec deductible was, and wherever that number met, that was your spec rate,
okay.
Right?
Wow.
So it was that simple.
It was much more sophisticated
exactly,
now, of course.
Of course. So they would just come to me and they said, this is medical stop loss. So the lady tried to explain, the person I interviewed with explained everything to me and how it worked. I'm like, okay, we'll give it a shot. We'll see how it works. And then, like I said, it just turned me on to this whole new world of self-funding and TPAs and underwriting medical stop loss insurance, which was way more simpler. Even then, underwriting medical stop loss was way more simpler. Half the time you were doing it on a pad and paper.
Yeah.
And an adding machine. That was it. Now look where we've come.
An adding machine too.
Right, right, exactly.
But I'm glad you just told that story, because I didn't know why it was called the manual. Like, I'm just thinking, obviously an underwriting system, since I started, it was either all electronic or whether or not web-based, or, they're using some third-party system like a David Young.
Right.
The manual, I didn't realize actually was a manual. Like you're saying, you open up a book and refer to where that intersection was.
Exactly.
That's the appropriate stop loss spec. So that's really, really interesting, man. So now we're in sales.
Right.
Talk to me about, like, was that once you got in, you're like, this is what I should be doing? Did you enjoy that aspect more than underwriting?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. It was just, once I got into it, I enjoyed it, and obviously the ability to make a make a little bit of money, right?
Yeah.
Also helped that fact, and then obviously, I think from an underwriting, from a sales perspective, rejection. You just have to be comfortable with rejection, because more often in our business, probably 95 times out of 100, the answer is going to be no. But when it is yes, then it's very satisfying. And again, like I said, it just goes back to, at least for me, my wanting to be a consultant, and wanting to just give advice and hopefully help people solve problems. That's really what it's all about.
Well, and I took the same approach. I was not an underwriter. I actually wasn't even a salesperson when a recruiter called me into the business. And the only thing I knew how to do was, I'll dig into the understanding. You talked about being a subject matter expert, an SME, a proverbial SME. That's what I was like, I have to be this, because I'm not a sales guy. I don't have all these sales skills, at least haven't been trained formally. And so I thought, if I was going to buy stop loss from somebody, what would I want them to be like? And just exactly like yourself, I'd love to buy stop loss from you, because if I go to you and I need something or I have a question, you're going to give me an answer. You're not going to try to sell me on something. You're going to be able to go, all right, well, here's what it is, or here's what I think you should do. And when you're buying something that's as sophisticated as I would say as stop loss, as well as unpredictable as stop loss, you need somebody that truly knows what they're doing to develop that level of trust, right?
Right.
In order to go, all right, well, I trust what you're telling me, Vince, so let's do it.
Yep.
So I took the same approach. Obviously, you're more tenured, and your background in actual underwriting makes you even more well-positioned, I think. But I definitely appreciate the approach you've taken, and I think that's why you've been successful, right?
Well, like I said, the underwriting background certainly helps when you're having those conversations with producers and being able to explain why things are happening the way they're happening. Or if someone has a question, to your point, you're not saying, well, let me call somebody and I'll get back to you.
I'll get back to you.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and I always felt it was like you don't have every answer, but I felt it was my obligation to be able to field essentially every question that came my way. Because if they're trusting me to understand stop loss better than them as a broker that's got to understand 1,000 other things as well, I'm almost like, man, if I couldn't answer that question, I felt I've let them down. Even if it's, I'm a sales guy at the end of the day. You can ask me something very technical, I've probably got to ask somebody else. But I'm like, I tried to know everything I could and field every question myself because there's a quicker turnaround time. Then they look at me as the expert as well, and they're going to trust me in the future too. So I know we want to flash forward to Partners, but let's table that for a second because we're going to get into the value proposition of Partners. Before we go further, stop loss MGU obviously is what we're going to talk about today. I've had it defined once before on the podcast, but it's been a while. So could you lay out what an MGU is in the stop loss world?
So, managing general underwriter, as they're called. To me, or my definition anyway, is, MGUs are stop loss providers. They perform, and more often than not, most of the services that any other direct writing carrier or BUCA would cover. They underwrite, issue policies, they collect premium, they pay claims, and they, those are the things that they do. I mean, no different than any other stop loss provider. The big distinction to me between an MGU and a direct writing carrier or a BUCA is risk. Some carriers, most direct writing carriers usually take on the lion's portion of the risk. They may lay off a portion of it, or they have higher thresholds of risk that they take versus an MGU, who typically takes very little or no risk. Doesn't mean the responsibility is any different, the accountability is any different. It just means the risk sharing arrangement or a piece of it is arranged differently than what it would be between of a carrier or a BUCA.
Yeah, and so is it true usually you would say that it's the possibility at least exists that an MGU might have a lower threshold in which they reinsure than maybe a very large direct writer? Is that the norm, I guess?
Right, and of course, that risk is being laid off to various a reinsurer or multiple reinsurers who are doing that, and then they're paying and also the paper involved, which is the carrier. They're paying the carrier for the right to issue policies under their name, and then the MGU themselves take a percentage of the premium as their way to pay the bills.
Yes, and so I was going to ask. Oh, shoot, it just slipped my mind here, direct writer versus MGU. We'll come back to it. So we've established what an MGU is. Tell me about your perspective in working and maybe why you enjoy working in MGU versus a direct writer or BUCA space. Not to disparage them, but what is it about this space that you like better?
Sure, exactly. And having, you had mentioned, I worked for Zurich for about 11 years in sales for them. And so I had previous experience, but primarily my stop loss experience was working with them as a direct writer, and then the MGU side. It's funny. I had this conversation at SIA with with this particular broker, and we were having a conversation, and not someone I currently work with, but just and they were like, hey, they had somewhat of an aversion to working with MGUs, and I said, well, why? Yeah, and they were like, well, we've had some problems with some issues, some legal issues, and more often than not, the issue's been with an MGU versus a carrier. And I was like, okay, but it frustrated me because I think our industry, and who knows how long ago that was, but I think our industry the MGU industry has really gotten a bad rap in that respect, because to me, more often than not, when you run into those legal issues, it's not necessarily a result of the MGU doing anything wrong. It's from an issue of them. Did anyone interpret the stop loss policy to see what claims were payable under the plan, under the policy? And to me, I think and I don't know if you checked this out, but we did a whole podcast series with Adam Russo from FIA Group. Shout out to Adam.
Fan of his,
But he did it. He explained this so eloquently in Adam's own way that the biggest problem is that people don't read the policy. And I know I'm kind of digressing here.
I love this. No, please keep going.
People don't read the policy because, we talk about plan mirroring, we talk about all these various things, but if you don't know the intricacies of what's in the policy, the exclusions, all the things that make up what that policy is, if you don't read that and then a claim comes through and you're like, oh, well, but my plan document says this, but hey, the policy says this, you're going to have a potential conflict.
Yeah.
But no one reads the policy.
I know.
And then there's never, it's always fine and dandy until the claim comes. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, you're buying, our industry has gotten to a point where we've become this, race to the bottom mentality, and you're buying the lowest price, but you don't know what you're getting for the lowest price.
Exactly. Well, and so, I won't get on my soapbox for too long, but that's one of the things I do on PlanSite is you mentioned plan mirroring. There's a lot of things that we try to bring to the forefront from a provisional standpoint on stop loss that tends to get overlooked. People, obviously, we know brokers going in fourth quarter, they got 500 RFPs out there. They can't possibly interpret everything, with the amount of time that they have.
Right.
Totally get that. So if there's something short of going through and reading every individual stop loss policy that we could possibly do to, I'll use the word ameliorate some of those issues that we're talking about. The plan mirroring, that's an important feature of a contract. You should know whether or not that has plan mirroring in. Let's put that on the forefront of the quote-unquote comparison or spreadsheet. Bring a lot of those provisions that are not necessarily on the surface of most quotes, but the fine print is important. That's a great example, and I would strongly agree with you. Plan mirroring is one of those things. And sir, let's explain this real quick before we go too far in plan mirroring. What is plan mirroring?
Plan mirroring is basically saying, for me, plan mirroring is that the policy is going to essentially mirror or duplicate whatever the plan document says. Mm-hmm. So if if the plan document says we're going to cover experimental surgery, that if it says that, then the policy says that it's going to cover it.
And is there usually some sort of a review process, at least for the plan document?
Yes.
So partners make sure you guys are
exactly review the plan document. Exactly.
Yeah.
You're not sitting there saying hey, wait a minute. Oh, this is, we didn't talk about this when we did the original quote. But we have a plan, review process. We review it to make sure there's nothing in there wacky. We try to come back and make suggestions or whatever. There is a process to review before.
Well, and that's really comes down to is like the partnership that we talked about. And you guys are obviously called Partners MGU as well, but it comes down to that partnership of, if I'm a consultant and I've got 100 groups I'm managing, I need to sometimes come to you and lean on you and say, Vince, hey, what am I getting? Like, is this in here? Or tell me what I need to know.
Exactly.
That's where a really good consultant, and I think taking the approach of not being a rep, being a consultant who represents a company for stop loss is the right way to do it, because there's a lot of stuff and there's not only so much time that these folks have to try to make sense of everything that's come in. And then in turn, these consultants are responsible for making recommendations to a client with sometimes surface level understanding of what they're actually presenting. Yeah. So the more you can do to make them look like a hero, the better, obviously.
Yeah. They're fiduciaries, to me, so they're in a position of making advice and giving advice. Yes. Granted, the policyholder has the ultimate, the employer has the ultimate decision, but what happens, it's going to trickle down if there's anything that funky that goes on with the deal.
Yeah.
Now you had mentioned like the differences, how I felt the difference between working for a carrier and an MGU. I would say probably for me the biggest difference is access.
Okay.
That's to me the thing that I enjoy about working in an MGU.
Okay. Explain that.
So for example, all summer, ever since all the restrictions have been lifted, like myself, our sales team from Partners, and our CEO Brian Miller, we've been on the road all summer.
Awesome. Talking
to clients. I don't with a BUCA or a direct writing carrier, do you think that you could get the president of that company on the phone if they had a problem? Do you think they're going to come out and visit you and find out what your needs are and how we can help? The access piece of it to me is insurmountable in terms of its impact, and we're already seeing the results of that. It's still early in the 1/1 season, but we've been able to kickstart some new relationships, kind of revive some old relationships that have been kind of dormant, And I think just that access and that ability to get out and see people and see what's going on just is really just, it's had tremendous impact. That's all
I believe
really
you. No, no. So a while ago, I think he was one of the early episodes. Jeff Petty with Pace Underwriters,
Right,
yeah, kind of had a similar mindset and similar approach to why he believes the MGU is in his opinion the preferable route. And it was exactly that. Like, pick up the phone and call Jeff Petty, his president of Pace, right? Like, and Jeff will come talk to you. So, do you think there's a sense where you get so big, though, at the scale that you're essentially a direct writer and you might lose some of the personal touch? Or do you think, coming from the approach that you have, that will always be the way that you treat clients?
I don't really see...
Because if you guys get a $2 billion block, right?
You get bigger.
Yeah.
I guess that can always happen, right?
Yeah.
That could always happen. But, I mean, if you look at the approaches that a lot of, like, for example... the companion folks, they've purchased MGUs, but they've kind of let them still do their own thing.
Yes.
And so as a result, you still have that touch. You still have that personal touch. You still have that intimacy.
Yeah, because you're still doing
clients.
business with the MGU who's underwriting the case. Like they get the companion paper. And you guys are what, US Fire?
We also have a second carrier now.
Who's the second carrier?
Everest Re is the second carrier.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so ultimately you're still doing business with Vince and doing business with Partners MGU. The paper obviously provides the assurance of the stability and financial, paid claims and things like that. But it's you. It's you, or it's partners they're actually doing business with. So I totally get it. So probably a good segue then, Partners MGU. Let's talk about the company, the value proposition, how you guys position yourselves as different than some of the MGUs in the market. So let me hear that story.
Sure. So our business model, I feel like, is kind of two-pronged in that approach. But I'll give a little bit of history about the company. Our chairman, founder, Mark Martell, has been in the business over 40 years, serial entrepreneur. He had various companies related to employee benefits. Back in the early 2000s, he started a PBM, pharmacy benefit manager, called Partners RX.
Okay.
And in forming that company as a way to bring on early adopters, he said, hey, Mr. Broker, Miss Broker, I'm going to build this company up, and in the event I should ever sell it, I'm going to give you a portion of the sale price back as a bonus, based on how much business you place with me.
Very cool.
So in 2013, he eventually, at the time it was but in 2013 he eventually sold the company to Magellan Health. The company's now known as Magellan RX Management. Sold it for about $300 million, and gave back, I think, about $30 million or so back to producers. So you had folks making a lot of money, did quite well. So hold that thought for a moment.
Sure.
Again, I talked about our model. The service model that we have at Partners, I think, is pretty cool. I mean, any producer of stop loss, you want three main things, right? You want sound, common sense underwriting. You want your claims paid on time, and you want some innovation when it's necessary, right? So, and I think Partners, we can offer all that in spades. I mean, our executive underwriting team, we've got 5 underwriters that average about 30 years. I'm sorry, 20 years of experience. I don't want to age anybody, but at least 20 years of experience, knowledgeable, know what they're doing. A lot of our leadership have either owned or been a part of startup MGU operations. So it's just that entrepreneurial spirit of knowing how to get things done. Claim side, getting your claims paid. I mean, our claim shop is amazing. I mean, we probably average turnaround on clean claims is about 5 days, 4 to 5 days. But anybody can pay a clean claim, right? But even on the dirty claims, a max we're averaging about 14 days, which, based on what I understand, is about better than 60% of the industry. So you're getting claims paid. We've made some investments in our people and in our strategies and how we can help clients write business, how we can help producers write business. On the people side, we have a team of and Brian Miller, our CEO, deserves all the credit for this. What he did was he created a farm system, what we call a farm system, where we took underwriters from college, plucked them from college, and are teaching them the business from the ground up.
Amazing, yeah.
Right. MGUs don't do that. They typically don't do that. They usually are trying to find acquired talent, people with experience already. Only insurance companies do that kind of stuff. I was part of that. So we've done that, and now have positioned a group of young people to be able to take their careers to the next level as they continue to learn our business. So they learn our business. They mentor with people like myself and our underwriting team and our other sales staff, and learn the business, and hopefully can build a career for themselves.
Well, that's amazing. I'm actually very, very appreciative of you guys doing that, because I got plucked out of college, but I was a claims adjuster to start, but an insurance company, Liberty Mutual, gave me an opportunity to start my career and learn what insurance really was, and it changed my perspective on the industry as well. So I think that's awesome that you guys are doing that. And if you have an established partner's way, right, it's easy to turn around and replicate the process and teach them.
Exactly.
And then you farm them, right? You farm them in it, you groom them essentially in your way of thinking about things, and you've got a clean slate to start from rather than necessarily undoing maybe some bad habits and things like that.
They don't have the taint on them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So you said to table that, but let's talk about the Partners MGU model versus the Partners RX. Obviously, there's a successful exit there and a return of bonuses. So is that a similar model for the stop loss?
Yeah, pretty
side?
similar.
Okay.
Pretty similar. What we call our build, sell, manage model. Our intent is to build a company. We continue to build it now. We're probably.
How far have you guys into the project?
Well, we just had our 5th year in business.
Okay.
We're about $100 million in premium now as a company. The idea is to build the company to a point of critical mass, I should say, and at some point the intent is to sell the company. Okay. We don't make any joke about it. We don't, try to hide under that premise.
Yeah.
The intent is to sell the company, whether it be to a direct writer or to private equity or whomever, and split 50% of the sale price with our producer partners.
Okay.
But it's not like build, sell, and then everybody kind of go their separate ways.
Yeah, tell me about the other side of that.
Yeah, so we've got a continuity plan in place. By which, myself, all our executive team, we're all contracted to stay on at least 3 years after the sale to, maintain what we have and to kind of grow it into the future. Okay. I think in this day and age, as you've seen, Spencer, there's acquisition everywhere. There's companies being bought, direct writers buying other direct writers. You've got MGUs being purchased. But I think in regardless of that, I think we're going to be around for the long haul. I think there's going to be a situation where, the value of MGUs are going to be increasingly needed, and I think this is just offers a springboard to that. But
and then what? I wonder if there'll be a third round of this, a partners, what maybe. Partners Dental or
who knows? I don't know.
Partners Insurtech.
I don't know, man.
Who knows? Who knows what the next round? But
who knows what the next iteration is?
I appreciate that. I mean, that is obviously very unique in the marketplace. It's already been successfully done once with the Partners RX. So I presume people that are doing business with you obviously believe in the potential of that outcome, which is great, right? And then, like you said, don't make any bones about it. Don't pretend that's not the case.
Right.
And if there is a continuity plan in place, the customers can ultimately make a decision at that point. Is it appropriate to continue? Which I presume it probably would if you're working with the same people and the same support staff and things like that. So that's really cool. But tell me about you guys. You've started to utilize media as well, which I noticed you guys have done really well. You're doing a podcast. You've got the Partners Shorts. Yeah, what was the impetus for doing those things?
Well, I think it was more so about, trying to create some brand awareness for the company. And again, it's all about that consultative approach, trying to put yourself in a position that people look at you as a subject matter expert versus just being, you're just selling stop loss, right? Yeah. So after some discussions with Brian, and we've got there's a gentleman in our office, JT Healy, who has some background in media production, who we were able to kind of take advantage of his talents, where he could kind of put together the production side of it. And then as us as individuals was able to put together some content. We kind of come up with the content on our own and kind of build this. And the podcast idea, it's been something I had been talking about for a while. I just felt like we needed to create some awareness for the company amongst folks out there. And so after some discussions, it finally got, I was like, hey, we need to have a podcast. What I didn't know was that, you need to host it. So that wasn't what I was expecting. You brought the idea up,
so might as well be you.
Right. It was like, well, you need to do it. I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's been fun. It's been fun. Like I said, I'm learning. I think, this is next year will be my 36th year in insurance. Okay. And so, I'm like, I thought this would be something that would be left to the young people, but you're never too old to learn. And so I'm just still kind of learning, still growing and learning how to do this better. And I'm even sitting here doing this is really giving me a lot of,
You already got ideas or your wheels are turning. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what's fun about it, right? Like, I didn't know anything about podcasting to start. Unfortunately, we've got great folks like Nathaniel over here, and the studio is turnkey. But, you know, I'm learning about just mic technique, and I'm learning about when I sit back and watch an episode, how was I sitting? You know, there's all sorts of nuances to it that you kind of start to embody over time as you do it. But like, I've learned this the very first episode I did. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Exactly. I was in good hands, but I had no idea what I was doing. But you look at it and you look back at it, what would I do differently? And you start to grow in it. But I think there is a space for this. I think there's also a marketplace for these ideas of people that want to consume content. I like your partner shorts. I watched one the other day, and I forgot the gentleman that did it, but it was a list of provisions in the contract that are important to stop loss. And you know, what did we miss? And I'm like, well, you just listed like 8 or 10 of the great ones. I don't think there was anything that you really missed, but those are the things. That little nugget, it was a couple minutes. Oh, something to think about if I'm a consultant. Yep. Perfect, right? Give me something really quick to think about, and what am I missing? And you guys do a really good job of that. And so definitely keep going. And like I said, the commercial that you made for Partners MGU a couple years ago was top notch. And I just think, I think if you're not adapting to the new content creation style marketplace, you might get left behind, right? Absolutely. Or at least worst case scenario, it's going to make your job a lot harder because it's a lot harder for people to know you. But they can get to know you really quick if you're consistently creating content, especially on LinkedIn. So I saw you made a video on gene therapy a little bit recently. That was discussed by my friend Anthony Russo over at Voya, and I think it's obviously relevant. I've heard it brought up a number of times in terms of concern of the future of stop loss renewals in the space and loss ratios. So let's talk gene therapy. Tell me what I need to know there, man.
Well, and I'm not a doctor. I'm not even going to say I played one on TV. I'm not going to say any of that.
You could pass for a doctor, man. Those glasses and dressing sharp. Yeah, I think you could.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. No, well, gene therapy, I guess, to break it down in basic terms, is the ability to take human-made genes and insert them into people who have various ailments, cancer, hemophilia, hepatitis, retinal disease, and these human-made genes attack the bad genes that are present in people's bodies, certain cancers, for example, and either replace the bad genes, overcome the bad genes. It's like an army of good genes goes in, attacks the bad genes, overtakes them, and then kind of rejuvenates the body.
Okay.
And it's used to prevent disease. I guess that's the best way I could explain gene therapy. It's an emerging market. I think it's supposed to be like a 20 billion plus market in the next 10 years. You've got 50 new therapies that are coming out here in the next few years that are going to, there are in trials now. That's a pretty significant number. But the biggest thing is how much these things are going to cost.
Yeah.
That is going to be bananas.
Yeah. So, I know I've heard Zolgensma is one that got brought up recently. I think there's another one that I think was on your short as well. What are you hearing, maybe the next couple ones that are down the pike and costs that's associated with it?
I'm not, most of the stuff is not as significant as
Zolgensma. Yeah.
I have a hard,
I don't even know if it's Gensma or Gesma or Zolgensma. I don't know what it is.
When I did that show, it took me 10 times to get that right. I could not pronounce it. I was like, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it.
We'll type it. I'll type it on the post so people know what we're it spelled out.
I'm like, can you just hyphenate it for me I can just go slow?
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, you got stuff, even some stuff related to CAR T therapy.
I don't even know what that is. What you said, CAR T?
That's cancer. So it's for cancer.
Okay.
Again, it's another form of gene therapy or cell therapy. But most of these drugs are averaging, anywhere from. I mean, you got this the Z one drug, right? That's like at $2 million a dose. But you got these other ones that are like $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. And that's going to wreak havoc. I mean, you got a small employer; they get hit with one of these things, they're wrecked. They're done.
Yeah.
Well,
other than having a good stop loss policy, which ultimately you guys obviously have to take the risk and reimburse it if it's eligible, what can we do on the front end to identify the potential for these being utilized on our population, or if they do come up, alternative sourcing? Like how are you guys advocating as consultants to your employers of what to do in defense for things like that?
Well, I mean, what we hope will help is some form of alternative funding, perhaps if that's available.
Okay.
Honestly, if I were king for a day, what I would try to fight for or try to create is a carve out policy.
Okay.
Similar to organ transplant.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of similarities because the frequency is, I mean, maybe not as great now, but as these therapies continue to come out, more drugs get out on the market, I think you're going to see more and more people wanting to, having these therapies, these gene therapy treatments. And then as a result, it's going to start, claims are going to start coming through the roof.
So I like that. So almost like a specialty med or a gene therapy, maybe specifically a gene therapy carve out.
Yep.
So let me type that up as a note, and maybe I'll start a company.
I know. Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know how to underwrite it, but I'll figure it out. But I think you're right. That we've treated transplants that way. I know HEC as one example. They have organ transplant policy that they'll often sell in conjunction with the stop loss. And I think there's a strong argument to consider carving that out as a fully insured standalone policy. And if in the event that something like that happens, yes, you're paying premium every year that may not be utilized. But if and when it does, you're like,
pay for
the
itself.
ROI is there for sure. And I think I even, my buddy guy, Finley over there, he talks about the value of those things. And it's usually within the 3 to 5 year period, most likely it's going to pay for itself.
Yeah.
So I think you're probably onto something there. And it is a way to shift that risk off the stop loss MGU's plate too.
I mean, but the other thing too is that, and this is something it hasn't been done because you've got a lot. I'm assuming it's going to be administered either through, it's going to be through the hospital. I don't know if the PBMs would probably have some input in that.
Yeah.
But the ability, and I read this in an article, the ability to collaborate with the drug manufacturers themselves to get a better idea as to who's really eligible for this. Because what's going to happen, right? Somebody's going to go in, they're going to get treated, the plan's going to authorize it. It comes a stop loss. Well, wait a minute. Why are you treating this person for this illness when it really doesn't state it's supposed to be for this illness?
Yeah.
And that's where the problem comes. So having some understanding of what the actual drug is supposed to do for a particular condition would also help as well.
Well, and this is always whether it's a moral or philosophical dilemma, right? Because a lot of these gene therapies are somewhat curative in nature, right? And they're very, very, very specific, very, like you said, low frequency type illnesses or diseases. But the argument is, well, some of them will actually correct some things in the past that we aren't able to correct. So it's like, how do you tell a person or a child or something like that has a rare cancer that, well, we can't pay for that because it's too expensive, right? Then most people, when you look at it from an emotional standpoint, is like, surely you should pay for that. You put your finance hat on and said, well, who's going to pay for that, right?
Yeah,
and ultimately, you guys end up potentially getting stuck with the bill, right?
I mean, Spencer, like I mentioned when I did this segment, it's a public relations nightmare waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Or at least has a potential for being a public. You deny treatment for, some kid who needs the therapy, and then it's all over the papers. Or,
well, that's it. Well, the insurance company is the one that was wrong, right? And it's like, well, no, it's way more complicated than that. And, you don't want to create a situation where the pricing is unsustainable, right? And then all of a sudden you guys would keep new drugs come on the market in the middle of the year that you didn't necessarily account for, and you get hit with a couple and you're upside down. Your loss ratio is upside down really quick. So I think it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. Let's talk future looking then. So we talked gene therapy. What else are you seeing from 2022 perspective on renewals and underwriting? And people love to talk about COVID and what its impact is, but let's actually talk about that for a sec.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because obviously 2020 was a crazy year. Not a lot of movement in terms of business being taken over. Most employers were more inclined to kind of stay put, not make any big moves, which I think affected numbers for a lot of the carriers out there. They're probably able to retain their business, but they weren't. There wasn't a lot of growth.
Okay.
So flash forward, now we're in 2021. Companies have made money because claims were down, right? But still, that need to write business is still exists.
Yeah.
And so at least what I've been hearing on the street is that a lot of carriers are behind goal right now.
Okay.
So
I believe that.
Yeah. And so as a result, you're seeing an aggressiveness in the market that's unheard of. I mean, I've been talking about for the last 5 years, or not even longer than that even. Everyone, we keep hearing this discussion about the market is hardening. The market is hardening. We're going to start to see increases, blah, blah, blah. I haven't seen it.
Okay.
And to me, I think we're at a point now where there's so much supply in the market,
in terms of stop loss
options. I mean, you've got you've got the big direct writers out there, they take up 80% of the market, but then you've got these the other 20%, and every other day you're hearing about a new option out on the market. And of course, we know the pattern. Stop loss provider goes into business. Stop loss provider has to get market share. So they start writing business. They start quoting aggressively. They get some critical mass. Then, of course, if you're too aggressive, then you know what's going to happen. Claims are when the claims come in, then they got to retract, and they got to, they got to go through, either jack up rates or do whatever. But, you just got this never-ending cycle, and we've gotten to a point now, man, where everything is. I haven't seen pricing like this, man, in a minute.
Well, you're making me miss being a rep, because this is a fun time. It's like literally your year for 9 or 10 months, you just panicking and you're like, oh my God, am I going to hit my goal? And then in a week's time, you've surpassed your goal because 3 or 4 or 5 cases end up coming in at once, and and then you look up and go, oh, we can get aggressive, and you keep. It's so funny, the roller coaster ride that sometimes happens. And I don't know about Partners, but at Sun, like, we were always looking forward to 1/1, so that 1/1 business of next year rolled backwards. So you start the year kind of waiting and waiting and waiting for that 1/1 cycle to hit, and then it's like so exciting but so nerve-wracking at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. But I think 2022 should be interesting because will the chickens come home to roost? Will we start now to see the effects of deferred utilization? We're starting to see spikes in claims, but the question is, were all the prognosticators, were they maybe a little bit heavy-handed in that approach and in that thought process, or is it just going to even out and things won't be that crazy? Like, I've heard reports that trend actually is going to go down next year.
Well, I believe it. So, I think you could look at it on one hand, deferred care, I didn't go in and get my early stage preventative stuff, and it turned into something catastrophic. Okay, there's a potential for that. But what if there's also maybe unnecessary care, or an alarm bell was raised when realistically that nothing was going to happen had we not, too early a cancer screening, and maybe perhaps there's, as a preventative measure, we think we should do this, and it ends up being an actual claim.
Right.
You could make an argument that some of those stuff that we were worried about not catching actually maybe wasn't going to be anything at all, if you hadn't gone into the system and keep being pumped through the facilities and they're referring you to other, specialists and things like that. I mean, not to sound conspiratorial, but I could see why that would be an argument, as perhaps maybe the claims will be stable and not as bad.
Right, exactly. You could very well end up in a scenario like that. I think what ends up happening is, but eventually it could get to a point where, because if you're not cutting into your cost of doing business, you're cutting into your claims by continuing to drive down pricing.
Yeah.
So like I said, it should be interesting. I'm looking forward to 22, because I think there'll be certain folks that'll be poised, and I think we'll be one of those people who will be poised for whatever happens. But like I said, it should be fun. If nothing else, it'll be fun.
Well, without seeing your pricing and knowing your loss ratios, from what I hear about what you're telling me and what I know in the marketplace, you guys are obviously got some very smart people running the company and underwriting. So I imagine you guys would be well positioned to take advantage of it. So definitely good luck there. What about, outside of just 2022 from an underwriting perspective, what about more future looking, more forward looking? We talked gene therapy, we talked just the underwriting as a result of COVID, but what else should we be thinking about as a future of our industry?
I think the use of analytics in pricing is going to take on more of a role.
Okay.
You're already starting to see it in terms of, especially in the small group market. You've got the Vericais and the Rovers of the world who are out there trying to find ways to get a hold of that transition business. I think, to me, I think I saw something recently, 13% of employers below 100 lives are self-funded.
Yeah, something of that
Something
nature.
of that nature.
Very close, yeah.
I think that's where the growth is going to come from.
I agree with you, 100%.
That's where all the growth is going to come from. The brokers who realize that are the ones going after this business, because I can't tell you a broker I've spoken to in the last 8 months who hasn't brought that up to me, who hasn't said, Vince, I need a level funded product. Vince, I need a small group product, or I need something to address transitional business. And that to me is where our growth is going to come from.
I would agree with you, but the rub is always, well, how do we price it appropriately? You mentioned Vericai and Rover.
Yep.
both have set out in different ways to be able to help answer that question, because that transitional business has always been the problem is actually getting access to claims data, knowing what's under the hood. So if one or both of them combined helps open them up, get them transitioned to a level funded product or a self-funded product, and then we're not starting to get claims data from the TPA, then you know exactly what the real risk profile looks like. So there's a riskier nature, especially it's smaller, so smaller premium and things like that. But if they can solve that problem, whether again by themselves or collectively, if you could maybe somehow piece their solutions together, I'm with you, man. I think that's where the growth is. I've been on a number of webinars where I literally had a slide that said, large group employers were 91% self-funded, and then you go down market and it's 60, it's 2/3 or whatever. And then in that small group, it's 12, 13%. And it's been stable 12, 13% because the barrier to entry in terms of getting appropriate underwriting and competitive underwriting and companies willing to actually take the risk. That's why I think it's been so stable. But I think that market's going to open up. I absolutely do. Because the options, not only from an underwriting perspective, but the solutions on the other side of it, you mentioned, I need a level funded plan, right? Well, now there's more options. There's more people putting together level funded options, and getting through underwriting and getting through, the medical questionnaire is a little bit simpler. That's where the growth's at, in my opinion. Anything outside of that small group space that you see, any innovation you're seeing in the marketplace or point solutions that you guys have latched onto that you like?
Well, I think for us, I know we've made a pretty heavy investment in risk. Well, I call risk analytics ourselves. There are a lot of companies that do it. And no shade on them, but a lot of times they understand the business, but they don't understand our business to the extent that we feel like they should. And Brian, our CEO, he has a background in statistics, and so as a result, he, with the help of some folks within our company, created like our own risk analytics program through a Microsoft tool called Business Intelligence, BI for short. And what we've been able to do is kind of look at a few things, right? We were able to look at kind of like, we can analyze we can tell based on the initial information sent on in the RFP if the potential for that case being profitable down the road.
I see.
We don't use it as necessarily a means of declining cases, but just to kind of say, okay, what's the possibility of this case being able to make money down the road? And based on that, we can make suggestions to the producer to say, hey, maybe you should consider these things, maybe raising your spec or doing this or doing that. And then there's some other tools that help too. We can, loss ratio tools. We can look at propensity for TPAs, their ability to pay claims, on how they're, how they're performing. So if a producer comes to me and says, hey, what TPAs do you like? We're not just saying people that we like just based on emotion. We can talk about people we like based on facts. And tell make and share things with them along those lines. And also, block analysis tools to be able to show a producer, looking at their block, hey, where are the issues, where are the pitfalls, here are the things, here are the prominent claims maybe that you may be seeing on your block that you can address now and come up with programs to come up with. So I think, like I said, for us, I think that's where we're headed in terms of being able to use risk analytics more and more in determining how to quote cases and how to keep cases.
Well, and I think that's why the kind of the naming convention of a Partners MGU, obviously there's the partnership from the financial perspective, but it is a partnership that you enter into with the stop loss carrier. Of course, you're underwriting the risk of the employer themselves, but the broker is the one that's bringing you that risk. And ultimately, as a consultant, that producer, that consultant, their obligation is to do what they can to implement a program that will drive down that risk, or at least help control the risk that's unpredictable. So if you're entering into a partnership with a consultant, and they come to you and say, hey, Vince, I want you guys to get this case. Okay, cool. Well, here's pricing. We're good. We're firm. Good. But now what are you going to do? Hey, we're working together. I'm seeing these things. What can we do to address that? Because I don't want to give you a big renewal. I don't want to have to offload this case next year because it wasn't working. Could you help us out? We help you out, right? I mean, there's a mutually beneficial relationship that could exist in stop loss that I wish more people would take that approach rather than simply shopping stop loss every year, moving carriers that give you the cheapest pricing. You mentioned, cheap rates, great, but what are you getting for those cheap rates? I just wish people took more of a partnership approach to replacing business.
The commoditization of stop loss is unfortunate. And, I wish, and, it's funny, I've even had brokers say that to me, say it to my face. I'm just like, man, like, dude, do
it
you
hurts.
really?
It stings a
yeah,
little
it's just
bit.
like,
Come on, man.
don't
yeah.
you do?
Yeah.
You know, you really need to, figure some things out because you're right. I mean, not all companies are created equal, and like I mentioned before, the policy and how risk is approached are all part of the equation.
Yeah.
If you haven't figured, and if you rather know that on the front end and find out later when a problem comes up.
Yeah, so I know we got to get you out there on the plane, and we got a couple minutes left.
Sure.
Parting shots, your partner's parting shots. Like what? Yeah, we've talked almost an hour now, which has been amazing conversation, man. So thank you for that. Let's kind of wrap it up. What do you want the listeners to be thinking about as they go?
Personally, from an industry standpoint, I really would like to see a concerted effort to create mentorship roles for people in our business to bring on the next generation. That's really what I want to see. I think I read somewhere like the average age in our industry is like 55 or something. It's and I'm older than that, but to have mentorship opportunities available, and I know HCAA, SIA, they're starting to do some of that now, but we really need to expand that. I think there are a lot of bright minds out there. Period. I think they need to understand the world of insurance can open a lot of doors. I can remember when I first got into insurance, and my sister was like, "Why are you in insurance? It's so boring.
Yeah,
it's so whatever." Yeah. And it's been far from boring.
Yeah.
But that's the perception, right? And in some cases, feelings are facts. But I feel like if we can create, get out and talk to young people, do recruiting tours, do things of that nature, and have them understand our world, especially the self-funded world. It'll open doors that they probably
if you put
believe.
something like that together, man, sign me up, or I want to be a part. I mean, it's one of the biggest motivations I have in doing this podcast and doing the stop loss whiteboard series was like, I'm 39. It's not right. But I do want to educate the next generation, right? Like there may be kids that are 20, 22 years old, coming out of college, that have no idea what they're doing.
Right.
But the last thing they would consider doing is insurance. That seems, like you said, on the surface, so boring.
Exactly.
And in my opinion, at least in self-funding and stop loss and things like that, in the tech space I'm in now, I think it's anything but boring. And so how do we make it cool? How do we make it attractive to the best and the brightest next generation? I couldn't agree more. So if you want to go on a little tour across the country, and we'll do some college tours and high school tours, and
let's do it, man.
Some people in the industry. Yeah,
let's do it.
So anyways, last but not least, man, how do people get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Well, you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'll just look up Vincent Lewis, my full name, as opposed to Vince, but Vincent Lewis on LinkedIn, or my email address is vince.lewis@partnersmgu.com. Or you can follow the Partners MGU page and get through me that way as well on LinkedIn.
Yeah, what's the best place to find either the podcast or the Partner Shorts?
Actually, we have a YouTube channel as well under
cool.
Partners MGU on YouTube. Yes, as well. I believe we have it on Instagram, YouTube. I'm not sure about Facebook or Twitter, but definitely on Instagram and YouTube.
Awesome, man. Well, definitely check it out because you guys are doing amazing stuff, and I don't think there can ever be too much good content in our industry. So thanks for coming on, man.
No,
great
Spencer,
to meet you at SIA. I really, really appreciate you changing your travel schedule to make this happen, and it was probably one of my favorite discussions, man. So really, really appreciate you coming.
No, thank you, Spencer. Again, thank you for all the work you're doing out there as well, man. This is, like I said, this has been a blast. I've enjoyed it.
My pleasure, man. Well, let's do it again soon sometime, okay?
Absolutely.
All right. See you, Vince.
Yep.